Hey, deserving listeners, Love is Blind, Season 4. This is After the Altar. Let's watch.
Well, you always have this Weeda Brown.
Yeah.
You always do that thing.
It just like rolls off your tongue. Hey, y'all. Weeda Brown.
What she
We
said.
still kicking it.
She's beautiful.
This is beautiful.
Space Needle, it's nice. I know a fair amount of people who live in Seattle and have never been to it, but I've been to it many times, mostly to entertain people from out of town, even as a kid, and it's nice. And the restaurant is constantly moving. And then there's an upper deck where you can view the city, and the ground is glass or plexiglass or something. It's pretty hairy. If you have any kind of fear of heights, it's not recommended.
It's just slower pace, so having to get used to that.
Mm-hmm.
But we're there, you're there, so
Well, it was a big adjustment for you.
yeah.
And if I haven't said it before, which I'm pretty sure I have, but I really just want to reiterate just how thankful I am for you making that move for us.
Absolutely.
I also should say that for a while, I used to live right next to the Space Needle, and I would walk to work right underneath the Space Needle. And there was always this one guy that would play music in a very loud and annoying way every time I'd walk by. And he had an amplifier, and I just thought, play your instrument, because it was an acoustic instrument, but you don't have to amplify it, or it's just like screeching in my ear. So... But I do find it funny that when I was living downtown, I stereotypically lived right next to the Space Needle. It's sort of like if you live in New York City, people are just like, oh, so you live like in Times Square? Yeah, this is a good pitch. They got to throw out the first pitch of the Mariners game. Stacy and I were an hour ago stuck in traffic we were driving downtown. In other cities, they put the stadiums outside of the city because, logically, the city has bad enough traffic as it is. You don't want to add more traffic to it, especially with the baseball stadium, because baseball, it seems like it's every frickin' day. And Stacy and I were downtown, and our route was heading through there, and we got stuck in the traffic, and I was getting real frustrated so I will never throw a first pitch, because why would they ask me? But I do think about it sometimes, like, what if I did? And although I'd like to think of myself as a fairly athletic person, I played baseball for many years. I never pitched, though, but if you play baseball, you can probably manage. And I am quite positive that I would flub it terribly. A lot of people do.
Are you ready for a good time?
Guesswork Spark. I don't know. They've shown a lot of scenes of Seattle. I feel like I need to do like some kind of travel video, or that's what this is turning into. Stacy and I we had a boat with oars, a dinghy. You can rent them.
I'm so happy to see you. You look so beautiful.
We still have the same thing. Oh my God. No, it feels so good.
Me and Liz literally talk like every day. She's heavy-handed on the text. I hear from her often. And
Interesting. So Paul's mom and Micah are friends texting every day, which I think there were a lot of people, including my wife, that really thought it was funny that because Paul's with Micah and we hadn't seen Paul's mom, and you wouldn't imagine that Paul's mom, I don't know what sort of stereotype you have about someone that looks like Paul regarding his mother, but when we meet his mother, you're like, oh my God. Now, on the surface, appearances or vibe or something might seem like Micah and Paul's mom are very similar, but who knows? I mean, they could be extremely different individuals. We can't just imagine someone's personality and vibe just from watching a show like this, but it is interesting. And I think I talked about at the time, there are a lot of ideas about, we marry our parents, Oedipus complex, this kind of thing. And it's more complicated than that, but the short version is that yes, the people that take care of us when we're young imprint on us certain things, especially if they're positive, but even if they're negative, even if you were abused growing up, your caregiver, if you're abused by your caregivers are still your caregivers. They still give you food or protect you to some extent, even though they might be terrorizing you half the time. They do protect you some of the time, and they are there for you some of the time. They give you attention some of the time. But especially if your caregivers are not abusive and secure and good caregivers, then we associate all the good things. When we're 2 years old, we desperately need caregivers, and we look to them, and everything that is them is encoded in our brains and associated with all those good things that we're getting, including just being close to someone, right? When you're 1 year old, when you're 2 years old, 3 years old, often we don't have that many people in our life. Our parents might have a number of people in their lives, but we might have, especially if it's a single parent, you have one person in your life. And that's every day, 24/7, 365, that you're just looking and paying attention to that caregiver and just absorbing all the things about them, the way they look, the way they talk, the way they react to things, the way they show emotion, the way they smell, the way they feel, the way they talk, the accent, their mannerisms, that kind of thing, their preferences, the kind of food they eat. Everything is just constant paying attention and mimicry and encoding in the brain. And so when you grow up and you are looking for a close attachment figure, like a friend or being married, then it's common. It's hard to demonstrate this scientifically exactly and measure this, but it stands to reason that for us, we might look for similar things. Do we always look for similar things? No, absolutely not. There's a notion that opposites attract, which is not, it depends on what we mean by that, but when we actually do look at the data, we actually look for people that are very similar to us. People that have similar goals, people from a similar culture and subculture, class, if you will. Middle class people tend to marry people that grew up in middle class families, not always, that sort of thing. The kind of music, we really are attracted to very similar people than ourselves, and we tend to focus on the differences because that's what's interesting. But if you really just tally up all the similarities, now, are there outliers? Yeah, there are some couples where the two individuals are different in a wide variety of ways, but in general. So could Paul, being raised by his mom, have encoded in his brain a certain type of person? The other thing is that when we are developing our personality and our defenses, we are always doing that in relation to our caregivers. So just thinking about Paul in particular, there's really no way for me to know this, but it's one hypothesis among thousands. But maybe if Paul's mom is kind of like Micah, well, what is Micah like? Micah's hard to actually know what she's really like because she presented in two very, very different ways, probably a number of ways during the season. But, there's the first half of the season where she was very immature, is one word to put to it, mean, insecure, childish, hurtful, superior, acting, arrogant, really awful. Vindictive, you were there. But then the second half of the season, she came across, at times anyway, as being vulnerable, mature, able to, instead of, I think I remember thinking that Micah could have easily gotten angry after the altar, during the day of the wedding. She could have been like, well, screw that guy, and I didn't care. But she just expressed her sadness. Now, I know some people think that it was just for show and she's trying to make up for the mistakes she made earlier, but it looked genuine. It could have been fake or at least amplified by her, but who knows? So it's hard to know who Micah is. And of course, we don't know Paul's mom. But anyway, the point is that I think I have a general sense of Paul's personality. His personality is pretty consistent through the season. Not his entire personality, but some aspect of it. Fairly intellectual, fairly subdued, not very expressive, kind of blunted emotionally seeming. Probably a lot of emotions going on for him, but he's just not super out there, maybe a little shy, not really sure. And also with an asterisk of him not knowing how other people will be impacted by the things he says. Like when he was saying that Micah wouldn't be a good mother, and that's why he didn't marry her. I just thought, whoa, one, how would you possibly know that? Two, talk about kicking someone when they're down. It's like, not only am I not going to marry you, but you're going to be a terrible mother too. It's a pretty awful thing to say, potentially. I mean, some people wouldn't care if you said that, but a lot of people would. So, but overall, I think Paul has a good head on his shoulders. When Micah's friend was coming after him, he just, you can imagine a lot of different reactions that someone in Paul's position could have had. He could have come out swinging, literally or verbally, figuratively. But he just, seemingly, the way that the edit looked, it seemed like he just decided to back away. And we saw him around the corner at the alibi room. He's just by himself drinking a beer. Just, I think I'll be over here. So if I imagined his issues, the sort of pros and the con, or the double-edged sword of his personality, the other side is a lack of understanding his emotions or valuing his emotions. Thus, maybe when he was younger, not a lot of attention given to him regarding his emotions, not a lot of emotional attunement. Maybe something happened when he was younger, who knows. But so if we imagine, this is all coming back to this one point I'm trying to make, is you got Paul and his mom. And the point I'm making is that when we're developing our personalities, it's often, if not always, in relation to relationships, significant relationships that we're in when we're young. So if we imagine that Paul's personality, it's sort of like if you see an indent of something, you look at a footprint, there's in the mud. Well, you don't need to imagine that there was a foot there, right? Because you see the imprint. Well, when you see Paul's personality, you don't see the parent personality, but you can imagine the footprint that the parents put into the personality. And sometimes what this can indicate is that for the blunted, emotionally subdued individual, they might have had someone who either was very big emotionally and the child was trying to counter that, or there wasn't space for his emotions or something, and how that could develop that way. Or, and there's a number of other options, but just to point out too, another option is that the parent wasn't attuned enough to emotions, regardless of their emotional expression themselves, and the child was signaling emotion from 0 to 2, but eventually just starts to give up on noticing their emotions and expressing them because they're not being attuned to. No, it's not necessarily abusive, but it's just lack of paying attention. It could be that a parent is working too much. It could be that a parent was raised that way. It could be a narcissistic parent. It could be a distracted parent, or a sick parent, someone who is suffering from some sort of illness that makes it so that's hard for them to pay attention to kids. So we could imagine that, and then we could imagine maybe some of that association also attracting him to both his mom, not sexually, but, wanting to be in a relationship with his mom, and to Micah. We could imagine there's probably something in there. Often when I am working with people, this is a helpful way of looking at things. Can we scientifically demonstrate this? Not really. It's hard. There are studies that can demonstrate what I'm talking about, but there are so many factors that you have to measure, and you also would have to experiment on people, which of course is unethical and horrific to think about, that you'd have to raise kids. You take 1,000 kids and you raise each group of 100 kids in different ways. And, with this group, you raise them well, and then the next group you raise them poorly, but in this way, and the next group you raise them poorly in another way. And then you just, for 5 years, you do that, and then you just release them into the wild, and you just have them go through their lives for 50 years, and then you, at some point, check in with them and see what sort of people that they tend to be attracted to. And then you study the personalities of these other people, and then you try to see if there's a correlation there. But that'd be the only way to figure out if there's any kind of connection to your childhood. to the sort of partner that you choose. And even then, it would be kind of hard to narrow in on the variables because there are just so many variables in personality and experience growing up. But we can't do that, of course, because that'd be horrific to purposely abuse kids or neglect kids to see what would happen. And we just don't have that ability. So we have to retrospectively ask people, what was your childhood like? We have to cobble some sort of model together regarding how these things work. But I find that the model does pan out a lot of the time. But it takes a lot of assessment, and I can't just, look at Paul and go like, oh, his mom's like this and Micah's like that. There's too much unknown. I hope it's clear that everyone, because I really want to communicate this, that 0.1% of their personality is being presented to us. And it's being edited. Even that little sliver of their personality is being edited. I learned this very, well in my early career because I would meet people, I'd meet clients, and I would have a lot of time, maybe a few months, maybe a year, and I felt like I got to know them pretty well. And then I would be working with that client for another year or another 5 years or 10 years. And every step of the way, I would realize, oh, I only barely understood this person, even though I've been spending all my time assessing them and talking to them and getting to know them. And I'm, 7 years in, I'm just learning this aspect of their personality. Wow, how did I miss this? And the complexity of human beings. And so a reality TV show is, of course, only going to show us this tiny little sliver. The amount of getting to know someone, I guess, would be equivalent to, watching a reality TV show is the equivalent of, I don't know, maybe 15 minutes of the very first session. So just imagine how complicated these people are, how complicated Paul is, the mom is, and Micah. And I say this because I think it's very tempting just for people to not know that and to not respect that aspect of human nature and human experience. But particularly watching reality TV, because we'll just look at Micah and label her and say like, okay, I can put her in a box, but people are way more complicated than that. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. So I don't know about you, but when I go to bed at night, if I'm stressed out about something, then my mind will race with anxiety and I won't be able to sleep. For me, this is an indication that my mind is trying to work something out, either trying to solve a problem or process my feelings about something. And this is an indication that I probably should talk about it with someone who cares. And of course, therapy can help with this. It could be argued that therapy has always been and always will be a place for us to express these thoughts that are plaguing us. It's a place to be heard, and it's a place for us to hear ourselves as we talk things out loud. Well, one option worth trying is BetterHelp. If you're thinking of starting therapy, it's worth giving a try. It's entirely online, it's designed to be convenient and suited to your schedule, and also you can switch therapists at any time at no additional charge. So get a break from your thoughts with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/Kirk today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/Kirk.
To be open about where we're at, I think we both have like a hard shell, and we don't want to be the one to say like, hey,
there's something still here. Yeah.
I think we both are a little bit reserved on that.
He definitely takes after his dad in the communication level.
Yeah, that was something we definitely struggled with.
You might have to pull it out of him.
Okay, so we're learning that Micah and Paul are still kind of talking. Does that mean that they're kind of dating? I don't know. Paul's mom said that Paul has maybe a new partner, kind of, but Paul's mom didn't really seem to understand. Paul's mom seems to really want Paul to be with Micah. Well, it doesn't seem. Paul's mom stated that she would rather have Paul be with Micah than anyone else. Paul's mom was saying, I forget her name, Paul's mom. I just refer to her Paul's mom, Mama Paul. She was saying that she's never seen Paul smile the way that he did with Micah. But then again, maybe Paul's mom and Paul aren't very close. Maybe Paul's not close to anyone. I don't know. Another speculation that I would throw out there is that a mom to be friends with, because it's a little unusual for, these two people to be friends. I don't know if Micah is that motivated to be a friend. She seems receptive, but I wonder if Paul's mom stop texting if Micah would pursue Paul's mom. It seems like Paul's mom is pursuing Micah, but I don't know. Maybe Micah would also pursue her as well. Micah was, it was good for her to say, look, I don't want to come between you and Paul. I don't want to cause any problems. So maybe that's why Micah's a little bit more of the pursuee of this relationship. But the thing I want to get to is that Paul's mom just said something interesting, which I wondered if this was the case, that Paul's dad is like Paul in that, according to the mom, because he's reserved as well, or it's like, trying to pull, introverted, maybe reserved, you can be introverted and not have that be a problem. There's a difference between being introverted and being emotionally reserved in a way that harms you and or the people around you. Being introverted doesn't mean that you are emotionally reserved necessarily. People often will equate the two, and they can go together at times, but it's not necessarily the case. In fact, you can be introverted, meaning that you tend to have preferences for small groups of socializing, maybe even just one person. And when you hang out with larger groups of people, like a group activity or a party or something, it is draining and not your preference. It's harder to do for you. Whereas extroverted people will really crave that kind of interaction, more surface level. Extroverted people are also very attached and really want one-on-one relationships, but they also want there to be larger groups or more people that you're interacting with during the day, or you're more likely to raise your hand during a group meeting or something like that. Anyway, so there's nothing within that spectrum between introverted and extroverted that says that you're emotionally blunted. In fact, you could be emotionally blunted at either end of the spectrum, really. So I want to point that out because there's a lot of misunderstanding about what introverted is. Some people will say, oh, I'm so introverted, I hate people. It's like, well, that's not introverted. Introverted people love people. They just don't like big crowds, and they don't need to socialize with a lot of people throughout the day. And they also tend not to be as verbal, but they do talk and they do connect and they do share and they do cry and they do love, and and they're desperate for love and connection and conversation. But I think you get my point. Anyway, so we're hearing that Paul's dad is like Paul in that reserved way. Hard to know if that's introversion or if it is emotional bluntedness or avoidant attachment or something. These are all kind of related, but very distinct different things. And I was wondering if Paul's mom is actually friends with Micah, because Paul's mom and Paul's dad are divorced. I think that's what the mom said. And maybe Paul's mom sees her marriage that seems, it would be natural to have some grief for, even if Paul's mom was the one that left Paul's dad, that it takes a lot. I would, in my experience, divorces, especially if the relationship, the marriage, or any sort of significant breakup, even if it's not divorce, right? I don't know what to put a number to it, but any significant relationship, where you're very in love with the person, the breakup, the grief of that will last the rest of your life. Everyone that I talk to is basically like that. I think that time can, over time, especially if you're grieving well and you're getting support, it can cause it to fade significantly. But it's not uncommon for a divorce, a significant breakup, to, even if it's 30 years in the past, to still be like it was yesterday. It's a hard thing. We're geared to attach, and when that is severed, it lingers with us. We are biologically driven to find that person, even though our prefrontal cortex is like, I don't want to be with that person anymore. Our body and our emotional centers, our memory sense, our attachments, it's deeper than our conscious control. And so there's always this desire to, like, where is that person? So that causes some elements of grief. Anyway, so I wonder if the mom is suffering from that break and is, like a moth to a flame, really attracted to Micah and Paul's relationship because it feels similar to the mom and her relationship with her husband. And she can think, well, if I can get Micah and Paul together, maybe there's a chance for me and my husband. Or I don't want Paul to make the same mistakes that my husband made. Paul is treating Micah the way that my husband treated me, and I see myself in Micah, and so I want to be close to Micah, and I'm going to try to get Paul. You understand, right? You could see that being a case. I mean, it seems like that's a high likelihood. Maybe even the mom would even agree with that. I don't know. But given the scenario, it just seems like that would be a thing. And it's not a terrible thing. It could cause problems, right? It could cause a rift between Paul's mom and Paul, because Paul will be like, what are you doing? Why are you meddling? And why are you hanging out with Micah? It's weird. I don't want you to do that. I'm guessing Paul is fine with it. And there's really nothing wrong with it. It's not like it's threatening anyone. But Paul could be alienated by Paul's mom pressuring Paul to be with Micah, and, maybe never being open to Paul's new partners or something. I don't know. But it also could be harmful in that it might be an avoidance tactic, a denial tactic for Paul's mom. She doesn't want to face the grief or the pain that she feels about her breakup or her relationship with her ex-husband or her husband. I'm pretty sure she said they broke up and divorced. She can't face that, and is using this proxy relationship as a way to try to fix the problem, and in the end she's still left with her grief that is unprocessed. So I don't know. There's a lot of speculation in there, but I just thought I'd talk about that. All right, well, that does it for that episode, everyone. Please take care of yourself, because you deserve it. You really, really do.